Good morning, guys. Today is the first of the Edpuzzle video lessons that you'll be presented with this year. To make the most of the time that we're going to have in person, online, and or in class, we're going to be assigning videos that you'll need to watch before you come to class so that you can be prepared for the discussions and activities that we will be doing. Typically, we're going to assign the videos for the week over the weekend, even Friday before the week starts, so that you will be able to budget your time wisely. Each video will have a different due date and assigned to it so that you will know when you need to have that particular video completed. Today's video is going to be about observations, remembering, and recording, and why we use these skills in the world of forensics. So we're going to be talking about what an observation is and what perception is. We're going to talk about how your brain, what changes occur in your brain during the observation, and some of the problems that you're going to encounter when you're making good observations. So let's start out by defining what an observation is. So basically, an observation is something that you can see, hear, taste, smell, feel. Anything that you are going to be using your senses to take in from the environment around you. Some of these items you're going to need to note very, very carefully. So you'll see things, you'll hear things, but you might not pick up on that smell. You might not feel that texture, that temperature change. So you'll have to watch those things carefully. And then our perceptions are how we interpret the information that's received from our senses. And they are going to limit what we observe. Our perceptions are going to be how we interpret that information that we take in with our senses. And your perception of a situation or a scenario might be different than one of your classmates or from somebody different. We'll talk more about your perceptions and the factors that affect your perception in the next video. One thing to remember is that making good observations is an active process and it takes training. And we're going to be developing these skills so that you can understand how to apply them to situations and why they are so important. You must realize that good observations is active. So casually watching what happens, just kind of being passively in a situation, is not good observations. And most of what we do in the world is not really good observations. You can see something, but you cannot really observe it. And here's a prime example for you. Can any of you tell me what color tie Mr. Kohler was wearing during orientation? The man stood up on stage in front of you for 10, 15 minutes and talked. You saw the tie, but you don't recall it because it wasn't necessarily considered important to you, so you didn't register what that was, and that information is now lost. Now, if I said to you, if you tell me exactly what that tie looked like, I'll give you an A for the year. I'm sure many of you would be very disappointed that you didn't make that good observation. But that's just one of the points about being a good observer has to be very, very active. How does our brain work? Well, honestly, our brain acts like a spam filter. Right? It's only going to let through important information. But the big question is, how do you decide what's important in any given moment? And that's one of the challenges. We're not necessarily going to know what's important in any situation at any given moment. Something as minute as, again, the color of Mr. Kohler's tie, you didn't perceive as important, but it could have been. So during your experiences, your brain is going to fill in missing pieces. As you can see, if you look at the little diagram here on the side here, you can read that. Only half of it's there, but every one of you will be able to read it because you're basing it on your previous experiences of reading words and how words flow together. But you can read that. You read that it says the brain fills in the gaps. This is the wonderful, wonderful thing about our brains. Here's a really good example of this, of our brain being able to fill in the gaps and take experiences from before. You should be able to read this. You shouldn't have to think about it or really be challenged by it, but we can all read this. The words are all jumbled up. Um, excuse me, the letters are all jumbled up, but just as the article says, the first and last letter being in the correct place, we're able to read this. So I'll pause here and let you actually read it. I'm sure some of you have seen these things before, but it's really pretty amazing when you actually look at it to think, wow, I can actually read this stuff. It makes me happy because I'm a terrible speller. I usually get all the right letters, but they're very commonly out of order, but I can still read my terrible spelling. Some people are perplexed by that, but this is why. And here's one more for you. I hope you enjoy that one. Now, our brain fills in the gaps of the things that we observe, and this is going to lead to our perceptions of things. So we're going to see a situation based on our previous experiences. So our brain is going to make relationships with our previous experiences and what we actually are seeing. Sometimes these are going to be correct, sometimes they're not going to be correct. So here's a prime example. I'm going to show you a picture here, and I'm asking you, what color is this car? The minute you see the picture, think or say what color the car is. Now, I'm going to ask you to look at it again. Is this car silver or is this car light tan? Based on your previous experiences with cars, you might have leaned one way or another. I can't actually tell you for sure if it's tan or if it's silver. My previous experiences are making me lean towards tan because I had a car that was very similar to this color and it was tan. Another question, how tall am I? Most of you have met me. You've passed me in the hall. You may have had me as a teacher before. But how tall am I? Am I considered tall? Am I considered short? And that's going to be based on your height when you met and interacted with me. So that is going to bring us into the fact that our previous experiences, our prejudices, and our biases are going to color our perceptions. Now onto the nitty-gritty here. This is how our brain processes information. Right, so first step, we're going to make an observation based on our senses. And while we were making those observations, our spam filter is in full effect, and we're going to filter out information. Hopefully we're filtering out the junk that doesn't matter. Sometimes you filter out important things, but again, in the situation, you don't know. Our perception is going to fill in those gaps, and it's going to enrich the details based on, of our observations based on our previous experiences. At that point in time, what we saw is being stored in our short-term memory. It's the memory of things that just happened. To get that information into our long-term memory, where it's going to be, as its name implies, long-term, we have to rehearse and practice this information. This is why, daily interactions that take a moment you won't remember, but when you study for a test, you remember that information. When you read a good book or you hear a song over and over, you learn and memorize that information because you're practicing it and you're making those neural connections that are being used. So your brain basically learns like, hey, I put this information over here on this neuron and that's where it is. So when I need to go get it again, I know the path. So to improve the way that we are good observers, we have to do a few things. The first thing is we're going to have to observe things very systematically. And what I mean by systematically is using a system. Don't just pay attention to what you think is important. And I know that this is very difficult. And when I'm telling you like, hey, make an observation, you're going to look at a lot of details. But in the fleeting moments of a crime happening, you might not see the details. But try to pay attention to everything, not just what you think is important. You're going to look for patterns and make connections. And you'll just have to look at the situation to try to determine what would be a good pattern and how you would make those connections. And then definitely do not assume that you're going to be able to remember things later on. This is a common problem. you see a crime, you witness something, what have you, and then you're like, yeah, I remember all these details. And 2 days later, the police officer wants to talk to you about it, and you suddenly realize, I don't really remember that much. So, to help you remember those details, the best thing to do is to record things. So, recording information, writing it down, recording it, audio, making a little video, whatever, that's going to first off give you a record of that information, but it's also going to help you form again those neurons and the neural connections to help you remember this later in time. And then you can review your notes or your sketch or your video, which will help refresh those details and help you recall that information back when you need it. So, as I just mentioned, a few ways to record your information is to write it down, take some notes, do a sketch, make a map, take a picture or a videotape, make an audio recording, anything that's going to give you a actual hard recording of your information that you can refer to later. Sometimes witnesses to crimes will be called to testify months, if not years, after the crime. If you haven't recorded it well, you're not going to be a very reliable witness. This is why police officers are always writing things down, and investigators are writing things down. Lawyers are always writing things down because they want to make sure that they have all of this information recorded very, very well. So just to recap, we defined observation and perception. We talked about the changes in our brain, the process of making an observation, filtering things out, our perceptions, coloring it, going into short term and going into long term. And we also talked about some of the problems in making good observations. Next time when we see you in class, we're going to be putting to work some of your observation skills to see how good you are at actually making observations.